All right, we got a lot of different stuff to talk about here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We're going to talk about Cincinnati. We're going to talk about the ACC. We're going to talk about some recruit stuff, some other interesting numbers. This Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt, maybe we'll do this every week. I don't know yet. Kind of depends if there's something else to talk about. But if we don't have any other pressing topics, then this Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt will just kind of be a bunch of things that you can repeat to your friends at the office or in your Pitt group chat or whatever it may be and sound smart and impressive with interesting little factoids that you've come up with entirely on your own, not because you listened to this podcast. And if by chance your friends in the group chat listen to this podcast as well, you should listen to this first and text them before they text you. We got a bunch of different stuff, a bunch of different topics, a potpourri of topics, a pitpourri of topics, if you will. So let's dive into it right here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, all kinds of different stuff to talk about here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt. No real specific topic. The quarterback, the defense, the offense, Heather Like, or any of those different things that we've done over the last week or two where we just hone in on one topic and just kind of ride with that. Instead, we're going to bounce around, talk about a bunch of different stuff. I was looking at some things with Cincinnati yesterday and, just kind of digging into what they did in their game against Towson, obviously what they did against Pitt last season and what they're going to try and do against Pitt this year and what Pitt will need to watch out for when the Panthers go to Nippert Stadium on Saturday. So we got a lot of Cincinnati stuff to talk about. A little bit of bouncing around the ACC and kind of what we've seen out of the ACC after 1 week, or in the case of Florida State, at least 2 weeks. Sucks to be you. It sucks to be you to play 2 games and lose both of those. We'll talk about that just a little bit. We'll briefly touch on it. We'll talk about some of the recruits in Pitt's class. We'll talk about some transfer stuff, some of the guys who left Pitt, how they did over the weekend in week 1. Spoiler alert, not very many of them did very much. And we'll talk about just some other stats and some random things that have just sort of come up with in the past few days, and figure it's as good a time as any just to talk about it and throw some random stats and numbers at you, or not so random, because they might be relevant for this weekend's game. Of course, you know what we always ask you to do. Like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe button is right down there, so click that bad boy and get yourself signed up for youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. When you do that, you can turn on notifications so you get an alert sent to your phone anytime we go live, anytime we post new videos, whether it's our live stream like we did last night here at 8:30. We do it every Wednesday night at 8:30 here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, or the post-game shows that we do after every game. And we'll be live after the Cincinnati game, not immediately after the Cincinnati game on Saturday. I think it'll be a little bit later in the day, probably around 7 or 8 o'clock. Just think that kind of works out better. There's some things I have to take care of in the late afternoon, early evening, so I'm not really going to have an opportunity to go live right away after the game. We'll be live later, and so I don't have a specific time for you yet on when we will be live, but the best way to make sure you don't miss it is to subscribe to the YouTube channel and turn on notifications. Then you'll get a little alert. It says, hey, Panther-Lair is live, and then you will know it's time to tune in for the post-game show. So do that. Like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and of course the website Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.Rivals.com for all your Pitt sports coverage. All right, looking at Cincinnati, Bearcats beat Towson 38-20 over the weekend, their season opener. Kind of when you would expect them to get 18-point win. It had a chance to be close in the fourth quarter. Early on in the fourth quarter, Victor Dawson, a running back, a guy who was on the scout team for Cincinnati last year, he had 2 carries for 54 yards in this game on Saturday. Really just kind of came in late. He had 1 carry for 7 yards at the end of the third quarter, and then started the fourth quarter off with a 47-yard carry. You say, holy cow, this former scout team guy is rolling, and then he fumbled at the Towson 12. So he couldn't get in the end zone, couldn't get the touchdown. Towson got the ball back again. They're trailing, 38-20. They're down 18 in the fourth quarter. It's a hefty sum, but not impossible. They end up fumbling, getting it back, and still having to punt. Anyway, they fumbled. Cincinnati recovered the fumble. Towson forced a fumble on the fumble recovery. So it's actually, if you look at the drive charts from the game, Towson is credited with having 2 possessions in a row, back to back. When in reality, it was basically the same possession. Technically, the ball changed possession. Cincinnati took possession of the ball. Their drive was nothing because they fumbled before they even had a chance to bring their offense onto the field. Towson got the ball back, still ended up punting. Second half, they go field goal, punt, down, turnover on downs. Towson just never really was able to close the gap, due in large part to Cincinnati's success running the ball. The Bearcats ran it fairly often, ran it a lot, ran it 32 times, 32 official rushing attempts, so that includes a couple kneel downs. They finished 275 net rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, including a couple sneaks by Brendan Sorsby, the quarterback. If you recall, this is what Cincinnati did against Pitt last year. They rushed for 216 yards on 42 attempts, so not quite as good an average per carry as they had on Saturday against Towson when they ran the ball. They averaged 8.6 yards per carry. Evan Pryor, a transfer from Ohio State, carried the ball 4 times for 105 yards. Victor Dawson, like I mentioned, the former scout team guy, got his chance late in the game, 2 carries for 54 yards. That's going to bump the average up. When you have 2 guys who averaged, Evan Pryor, the transfer from Ohio State, former 4-star guy, top 75 prospect in the country in his recruiting class, goes 4 for 105. He averaged 26.3 yards per carry. And Victor Dawson, the other running back, who's probably like third team for them at best, goes 2 for 54. So that's 27 yards per carry. So you have Pryor 26 yards per carry, Dawson 27 yards per carry. That's going to help you get that average rush up over 8 yards, almost 9 yards. Corey Kiner, who had a big game against Pitt last year, 20 carries for 153 yards and a touchdown, went for 7 for 51 against Towson. Pretty balanced attack overall, 32 rushing attempts, 31 passes. Again, that includes 2 kneel downs and 5 runs by the quarterback. But I mean, if you take the kneel downs out, that's 30 rushing attempts, 31 passes. Pretty balanced as opposed to last season when I had written it down. I had a lot of notes on my page, and so last year Cincinnati ran the ball 42 times and threw the ball 27 times against Pitt. And that includes 3 sacks. So I mean, you could say they had 30 pass plays called, 3 of which turned into sacks, and about 39 rushes. So I mean, it's still an imbalance. You know what I mean? Out of 69, 70 plays, around 40 out of 70 were rushing plays, and they were having success. I mean, the reason Cincinnati ran the ball so much against Pitt is because they were having success. Corey Kiner was the big runner. Most of his gains came up the middle. Most of his yardage came up the middle, kind of running to the left of the center. According to Pro Football Focus, he had 81 yards running that way against Pitt last year, but that included a long 68-yard run, and that's going to bump those numbers up. I sort of had a memory of Cincinnati getting most of their yardage going outside, testing Pitt's perimeter run defense. Virginia Tech certainly did that. I think they really attacked the outside linebackers and just the perimeter run defense. And I thought Cincinnati did the same, and they gained yards there. According to Pro Football Focus, running outside the tight end to the left, they had 4 carries for 43 yards. Not as much success running to the right, but the bulk of the yards, about 120, 130 really, 130 rushing yards, came kind of up the middle, either between the center and the left guard or the center and the right guard. That's where they were really having their success. And I think when you look back at your memory of Pitt Cincinnati last year and the rushing success that the Bearcats had against the Panthers, a lot of it was coming up the middle and pushing around Pitt's defensive tackles. And that was sort of the story of the game on both sides of the ball. Cincinnati's defensive tackles having to wear with Pitt's interior offensive linemen, and vice versa. Cincinnati's interior offensive linemen having success against Pitt's defensive tackles. I don't know if Cincinnati will try to do the same thing this year. Excuse me. I meant to look up where they had their rushing success against Towson, all those yards they came up with, rushing for nearly 300 yards, and a decent amount of rushing up the middle and in between the tackles at the very least. They had about 83 yards according to Pro Football Focus, between the left guard and left tackle, about 80-some yards. Between the right guard and the right tackle, it was still running between the tackles, not getting outside all that much, not much in the way of sweeps and screens and things like that. Or I shouldn't say screens, but sweeps or trying to run, toss plays, any of those wide running plays. A lot of it was attacking the middle, which is where it's going to have to be a point of emphasis for Pitt's defensive tackles. I think, when we talked yesterday about the defense and talked on the Morning Pitt about Pitt's defense and, how good it was or whether it was good enough, I think the big concern was really the defensive line play. And we talked about the pressures that they got, but there's also the matter of concern with stopping the run up the middle. The defensive tackles, there was a point during camp where I was getting a bit bullish on them. I'm not sure if that held up. It seems like they kind of struggled a bit. I guess I should say they just didn't make as much of an impact as you'd like to see playing against Kent State. Certainly with a bunch of returning starters on the offensive line, Cincinnati's going to try to test the interior Pitt's defensive line. Now, having Brandon George and Key Thompson at middle linebacker will help be an extra level of security there. The outside linebackers, I think, look more active and explosive. They seem to be able to get to the ball. That's going to help. Donovan McMillan's going to be playing down in the box to try to defend against the run as well. But Cincinnati's got some receiving targets on this team. Cincinnati has some ways to attack you in the passing game. And it's funny, I don't think much of Scott Satterfield as a coach. I know he's won the last 2 games against Pitt, last year's game with Cincinnati, and then in 2022 when he was the head coach at Louisville. So he's 2-1 against Pat Narduzzi, having lost in 2020, that COVID year game, but then winning the last 2 years. I still don't think much of Scott Satterfield as a coach, but he certainly understood the assignment when it comes to working the transfer portal. Brendan Sorsby, Cincinnati's quarterback, is a transfer from Indiana. I mentioned Evan Pryor, the running back, is a transfer from Ohio State. And when you look down, I think the top 7 receivers for Cincinnati the top 7 receivers for Cincinnati in the game against Towson, and 7 out of the 9 players who caught a pass in that game are all transfers, and most of them transferred this year. Xavier Henderson caught 7 for 101 and a touchdown against Towson. He transferred from Florida. Joe Royer, the tight end, 5 for 89. He transferred from Ohio State. Sterling Buckhalter caught 2 passes for 70 yards and a touchdown. He transferred from North Carolina A&T 2 years ago. Jamoy Mays transferred from Chattanooga. He caught 2 passes. Francis Sherman was at Louisville and then Arkansas. He caught a pass or 2. Aaron Turner caught 2 passes. He was at UConn. All these guys are transfers. And it certainly doesn't make them unique. I mean, you look at Pitt, and their, receivers. Kenny Johnson, he's a recruit. CJ Lee, transfer. Kevin Bartholomew, he's a recruit. Kanate Mumfield, transfer. Raphael Williams, transfer. Desmond Reed, transfer. Jake Overman, transfer. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of Pitt's top 7 receivers in the Kent State game are all transfers as well, in addition to the quarterback, in addition to the leading rusher. So kind of similar to the build here for Cincinnati. That both of these teams have sort of rebuilt their offensive skill players, at the very least, the quarterback, the running back, and the receivers, and receiving options, rebuilt them out of the transfer portal. Both teams have sort of done it, and both teams had success doing so in week 1. So it makes it a little interesting because you don't have as much film on some of these guys. Obviously a guy like, for Cincinnati, Buckhalter or Turner, they've been around, for a year or 2. Kanate Mumfield for Pitt has been around for a year, but, Cincinnati's going to have to figure out what CJ Lee and Poppy Williams and Desmond Reed and Jake Overman, what roles they can play, just like Pitt's going to have to figure out how to defend Evan Pryor and Xavier Henderson and Joe Royer and all these guys. So interesting matchup of transfers. There's going to be a lot of guys on the field that you maybe didn't see last year, and that's going to make it an interesting challenge. Sorsby, the quarterback in the game against Towson, went 22 of 31 for 383 and 2 touchdowns. He has some explosive passing plays downfield for touchdowns. I think a 40-yard touchdown and a 60-yard touchdown, I think is where it ended up being. That was the runs. Burkhalter, the wide receiver from North Carolina A&T, had a 60-yard touchdown catch. Xavier Henderson from Florida had a 42-yard touchdown catch. Aaron Turner transferred from UConn. He had a 49-yard catch. I don't think that turned into a touchdown. No, that was just a 49-yard catch. So definitely some downfield attacks. I think it's going to be more of an emphasis for Cincinnati than it was for Kent State, particularly if Cincinnati can hold up in protection and give Brendan Sorsby time to go downfield to Henderson and those guys. But I think, that's been the book, right? That's the model for attacking Pitt, is going downfield and trying to stretch and force Pitt to cover downfield. The key to that is you've got to be able to hold it up against the protection, which means it's going to fall on Pitt's defensive line. This is a huge game for Pitt's D-line. A huge game. Stopping the run and getting into the backfield. This is going to be the case all the time. But I think as a first big test, as a first real test for Pitt this season, it's really going to be about the Panthers' defensive line. I'm coming around more and more. I haven't checked with the over-under it's lately, but the last I saw was 59.5. I think the over might be the play here. Now, I told you the under was the play last week. I was completely wrong about that. Pitt covered the over on its own. I think the over might be the play here because I think Cincinnati, between their rushing attack and passing attack, downfield passing attack, they're going to find some success, I think, against this Pitt defense. And conversely, Townsend had almost 200 rushing yards, went over 400 yards total. Their biggest problem is they were 5 of 17 on third down. They had 2 red zone trips, and they only resulted in field goals, and then they just couldn't get out of their own way in the fourth quarter. They had opportunities. They more or less kept Cincinnati in check in the second half, but really couldn't close the gap. And so I think Cincinnati's defense might have some vulnerabilities that Pitt possibly could take advantage of. And so I think I see some points getting scored in this game. So I kind of feel like the over might be the play. Like I said, I told you the under was the play last week. So you need to Costanza these bets. You know what I'm saying? All right. Looking in the ACC, just kind of a quick update there. Desmond Reed, the leading rusher in the conference, 145 rushing yards, is actually the third most total rushing yards behind Rashard Smith from SMU and Jamal Haynes from Georgia Tech. But in terms of yards per game, nobody's got a higher yards per game rushing average than Desmond Reed with 145 in his first game. Passing wise, Eli Holstein, right up there, third in the ACC. I'm trying to gauge what stat they're sorting them on. I guess on their efficiency rating, he's third in the ACC. Well, actually, no, that was passing yards per game. He was third in the ACC with his 336 yards. A bunch of guys have thrown 3 or 4 touchdown passes. Even a bunch of them have only done it in one game. We talked, I think, earlier in the week about Holstein and his place in the ACC. The 75% completions is right there near the top. The number of passes he completed is right there near the top. 3 touchdown passes is right there near the top. So, he's playing like one of the best, or he's put up some of the best stat lines in the ACC so far after 1 week. The conference as a whole, I don't think we really know anything just yet. Obviously, Georgia Tech and SMU both being 2-0. Georgia Tech is impressive. I think they've been, impressive so far. Obviously, the biggest storyline in the ACC, though, is Florida State. And Florida State is what everybody's talking about after back-to-back losses to open the season against Georgia Tech and Boston College. And my biggest thing, and I talked about this, I wrote about it on Panther-Lair.com probably on Tuesday, I think it was. It's a quarterback situation. I just don't understand how, if you're Florida State and you went into the offseason saying we're going to hitch our wagons to a transfer quarterback, that DJ Uiagalelei is the best option. That's the one you linked onto. Even if you just look around the ACC, you don't even have to look around the rest of it. Never mind the quarterbacks that transferred around the rest of the country. Just look in the ACC. Miami got Cam Ward. Syracuse got Kyle McCord. NC State got Grayson McCall. Duke got Malik Murphy. Louisville got Tyler Shugg. Pitt got Eli Holstein. Even. And Mike Norvell in Florida State looked around the country at all the available transfer options. And I just named the 6 or 7 other transfer quarterbacks who are starting just in the ACC. Never mind the rest of the country. But Mike Norvell in Florida State, who have as much cachet as anybody, looked around and said, this is the guy we want. This is the guy we think can take us to the next level. Norvell played against DJU. Like coached against him. Like my, apprehension and hesitation about DJU through the whole offseason, as people were talking about their expectations for Florida State, I kept, I would come back to the quarterback and I'd be like, Florida State should be loaded. They should have lots of talent, but I just don't know if I believe in this guy because the last time we saw him, he was in the ACC and not very good. And he went out to Oregon State and he was just fine. He didn't look like the kind of guy who was going to put you over the top. And so for Mike Norvell and Florida State to say, yep, that's the guy. That's the one we're going to replace Jordan Travis with. That's the one who's going to get us over the hump and into the playoff in a 12-team playoff year. I just don't get that. And maybe he ends up proving me wrong. Maybe he ends up turning it around and he's awesome, but he hasn't been awesome so far. He looks pretty bad, actually. And he looks like what he was when he played in the ACC before. Like, how is that the guy you go with? How is that the guy you commit to? I don't get it. And I don't know what the rest of Florida State's quarterback roster is. Do they still have Tate Rodemaker? I don't think they do. I feel like he transferred. He's at Southern Miss now. So you don't have him. He was maybe you don't want him. Their first game, I'm trying to see if I don't know who Southern Miss played, but the stat line is bad. They played Kentucky. They lost 31-0. He was 13 of 19, so good completion percentage for 126 yards and 2 interceptions. So maybe Tate Rodemaker is not the guy you want to hitch your wagon to, but that seems like a bad decision to go with DJ Uiagalelei. And, it's nothing against the kid personally. He just doesn't seem like he's very good and hasn't been very good. But that was the decision Norvell made. I'm curious how those message boards are going right now. I can't imagine that people are too excited. Last thing on the quarterbacks, got to shout out Mason Heinschel, Pitt's quarterback commitment in the 2025 recruiting class, playing for his Clay high school team in Oregon, Ohio. What's he done so far this season? Oh, nothing. Just 10 touchdown passes in 2 games. Oh, nothing. That's all. He threw 4 touchdown passes in the season opener 2 weeks ago, 6 touchdown passes this past weekend, off to a hot start, and he still hasn't rushed for any touchdowns. And he's a running quarterback. He's a guy who he likes to improvise. He likes to make plays with his legs. He had 119 rushing yards in the season opener 2 weeks ago. Didn't get into the end zone. I think his touchdown totals are going to be through the roof. I don't know if he's going to throw 6 touchdown passes every week, but he's going to throw a few. And he's going to start running from one. He could average. This is the number I'm setting for Mason Heinschel. This is the target I'm setting for him. 10 games. They have 10 regular season games, and I think they'll get into the playoffs. But let's just talk regular season. 10 regular season games, 50 touchdowns between the passing and the rushing. He's on pace for it right now. 10 passing touchdowns through 2 games. I don't think he's going to average 5 passing touchdowns every game. But I think once he starts supplementing the passing touchdowns with the rushing touchdowns, he's going to have a real chance to average that 5 total touchdowns per game and end up getting 50 touchdowns in 10 regular season games. He's playing really, really well. He's an exciting player to watch. His highlights are a lot of fun. Go check him out if you haven't gotten a chance to look. He was at Pitt's game on Saturday. He loved what he saw from the new offense, and he's pretty excited to play in it. I think he looks like a good fit, particularly running the RPOs that Pitt was using and will use. He seems like a pretty good addition. I think people weren't all that high on him initially when he committed, but he said his senior season's off to a great start so far. Good luck to Mason Heinschel going forward. All right, tomorrow we got the mailbag. So if you have not submitted your question yet, go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and post your question about Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, or anything else on your mind on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the place to get all of our Pitt video content. And you don't want to miss a live show on Saturday. Win or lose, we're going to have a whole heck of a lot to talk about. I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to this game on Saturday. I think it's going to be really, really interesting on both sides of the ball. And I know we are going to have a ton to talk about after the game on Saturday night on the post-game show. So subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on your notifications and you'll get an alert when we go live like we did last night and like we'll do on Saturday. So tune in for it. Can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun. But thanks for watching today. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great Thursday. We'll have an interview with Pat Narduzzi later today here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then tomorrow we'll have the mailbag right here on the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.